Okay, great. So, as Cheng mentioned, my session today is focusing around utilizing Knox Suite with other UEMs, MDMs, EMMs, however you want to describe them. And today we'll be using Microsoft Intune as the primary example. So here we have a short agenda, a very quick look at the background, an overview of a user scenario that I'd like to go through today. And then third is the implementation of how we can help the customer or the user in this case run through using Knox Suite to elevate their UEM choice. And then we'll go through a demonstration and finally a recap. So we'll get straight into the background. So just a tiny bit of insight. As you can see on the right hand side, the 2024 IDC Unified Endpoint Management software report does show just in pink at the top right of this picture that Microsoft is a worldwide leader, and if not the most popular UEM in the world. And that really isn't much of a surprise given how heavily integrated Microsoft services are with many IT systems. And that's really showing and telling here, hence the reason why we have Knox Suite and its capabilities of supporting users with or without Knox Manage. Mentioning Knox Manage, obviously, if we exclude that, Microsoft Intune is, of course, also one of the most popular UEMs that we enroll Samsung devices into the UEM via Knox Mobile Enrollment. And as I said before, customers can still get the most out of their Samsung devices by utilizing a number of Knox Suite's features. On the right hand side, I've obviously included the screenshot of what's included in Knox Suite, and we'll be covering most of these off today. So here we have our user scenario, and this is more of a sort of an initial meeting that you might have with a customer, whether it's a sales pitch or a pre-sale support session, where we've got our customer that we've met today, Good Homeware. They're a warehouse style store with lots of different locations across their country, and they're going to be deploying some Samsung devices to all of their in-store employees. They'll be fully managing them, and this customer is fully embedded into Microsoft, and as such, they want to manage their devices through Microsoft Intune. It's the most logical one for them, as well as their budget management have also determined that that is the way that they want to go through. So Intune obviously covers the vast majority of their needs, and it's very capable of managing mobile devices. But one question I'd like to sort of propose is, for any UEM really, is it really enough to manage Samsung devices on its own? And hopefully by the end of this session, we'll be able to look back on that and determine that Knox Suite is actually almost a requirement to be able to manage devices. And this will help them to be able to support their main priorities, which are obviously a hands-off enrollment, being able to support Samsung Knox policy controls. So they've got these policy controls for Android Enterprise in the UEM, but we also need to manage those at a more granular level sometimes. They'll be able to also complete firmware management, monitor devices, and then support devices remotely. Later on, there is discussion from this customer that they may wish to deploy customer feedback devices, which would be a kiosk device standalone without any users. And so obviously the remote support is a big factor here. And then throughout this, we'd be able to look into solutions that Knox Suite can provide along with their namesake providers of those solutions. So obviously mobile enrollment, platform for enterprise, Knox ePhoto, Knox remote support, and asset intelligence. Now, obviously, through each of these, we're able to do all of the points listed on the right hand side. I'd like to go through to the next slide for the implementation to go into some detail of how each of these points are deployed before I go into a demonstration and actually show pretty much all of these points and how they are able to be deployed. So here first, I'll speak about mobile enrollment, automatically enrolling devices into a UEM. So obviously enable to be able to get to this, we just need to be able to obtain the enrollment token from Microsoft Intune, and then we can configure the KME profile in order to be able to deploy that to devices. Being able to block devices that aren't enrolled properly means that if for some reason that the user has been able to get out of their deployment for any reason, that device is also able to be locked automatically after a defined number of days before they are before it's blocked and requested to be signed in properly. There is also a bonus element towards having the advanced settings enabled through the Knox Suite license in partnership with Knox Mobile Enrollment, and that's the ability to be able to lock and unlock your devices remotely. So if a device is lost or stolen or is otherwise needing to be protected, we can actually lock that from the mobile enrollment console now as well. Heading over to the platform for enterprise, we would obviously be able to deliver the Knox service plugin, which is the delivery mechanism for the Knox platform for enterprise features onto devices through a UEM. And so we're able to apply that through Manage Google Play, which is then able to support us in being able to automatically launch applications after install. So Intune is not able to do this itself, and so we use the Knox Service plugin and the Platform for Enterprise features to be able to ensure that apps complete their setup. So clients like the Knox Remote Support client would actually need to be opened for the first time in order to ensure that the configuration is set up completely, enabling it to be managed in the console without the user having to interact with it first. And we're also able to deploy the remote control device-wide policy, which allows the device to receive remote control commands. And we also have some more in-depth device configuration options, such as password requirements, and also something of note here that I didn't manage to get into a bullet point is things like key mapping as well. There's some interesting features that you can use, especially in the Microsoft world, focused around things like the walkie-talkie features within within Microsoft Teams, as well as being able to just assign side keys for different features or applications. And then heading into our next implementation slide, we have Knox Photo, where obviously we're able to configure a campaign to protect devices straight out of the box. And then we can also manage them automatically by synchronizing the EMM groups from, in this case, Microsoft Intune, whereby based on the group that a device is a member of, ePhoto can assign a specific campaign to ensure that that device is cared for in the way that it needs to. And we'll be able to go through that EMM group sync setup this morning. We'll also look at how we can support the Knox Remote Support client with a client secret key and being able to configure that within Intune itself and deploy that to the device in order to enable the user to be supported without them having to do anything in order to set that up. And obviously, I'll be able to showcase that this morning. And then finally, we have Knox Asset Intelligence, where we can again provide an app configuration to support the permissions that Knox Asset Intelligence requires automatically. So if the user goes into the client, they won't actually need to grant any permissions, they'll automatically be given. We can then obviously use Knox Asset Intelligence to deploy, to monitor the deployment of Knox service plugin profiles. So sometimes it can be quite tricky to determine whether a device has actually received its KSP configuration, as well as it can be quite tricky also to determine the cause of it struggling to receive that. And so we can cover off how Asset Intelligence is able to support in this feature. And we'll look at the difference of finding that information in Intune and in the Knox dashboard. And then we'll also be able to support obtaining device logs, which obviously IT support desks across the world have similar issues when it comes to finding device logs, and obviously being able to get users to actually get those into IT support. Many of these logs can be quite large in size, and so an email or a simple transfer method is quite often difficult, and obviously large file transfer operations are quite often blocked for obvious reasons. So hopefully by the end of this, we'd be able to really showcase how Knox Suite is able to use all of these different products in order to be able to support a UEM in elevating their device management capabilities, most specifically, obviously, Samsung Knox devices. So I'm going to head into a console demonstration. Most of this session will now be heading into a console. So I'll just quickly share my screen. And we should now have the Knox admin portal. So first things first, obviously we'd like to be able to manage a device going into Microsoft Intune. We can do this by heading to Profiles, and we can see this top profile for Knox Expert 2024 Intune has already been created. Now setting this up is as simple as heading to Actions and Create Profile, and from here we can give a profile name. Obviously the entire process for producing the profile has been overhauled in order to be a step-by-step process. I'm actually going into the existing profile for us to be able to have a look at exactly what we need to do within Intune to be able to get this set up. So as we can see, we fill out our default profile information, and then we move into the EMM information, whereby as part of the profile, we'll just select Intune as the EMM, and the agent APK will automatically be filled. From here, the next most important part is ensuring that we get our DPC extras for Intune. Obviously, it's specifying that here because we've selected that as the EMM of choice. Now, this text here is part of the JSON data, or the DPC extras, can be found in the support documentation. But it's quite a simple one. We just need to take this, copy this, and then provide our enrollment token from Intune. Now to get that, obviously we need to go into Intune itself, and we can head to Devices. I always like to select Android devices because then we're keyed in towards managing Android enrollment specifically, and we can go to Device Onboarding and Enrollment. Now from here, we obviously have quite a few different options, including prerequisites of managing Google Play. So here we can link our Managed Google Play account to Intune, and that enables us to be able to enroll a Android enterprise deployment. Heading down to the enrollment profiles, we can find the enrollment type that we would like to utilize. And in this scenario, we're looking at fully managed devices. So we can go to corporate owned, fully managed user devices. And from here, we can either create a policy or we can deploy an already known policy. So here we have my test one. We can see that there is an enrollment token here, whereby we just need to take the token from this profile and deploy that into the admin portal. Obviously, this is a slightly different profile, but it's a fully managed one nonetheless. We enter that token here. If it's a pre-existing one and you need to change it, obviously you can tap Edit, find this token element here, and we can paste in as required. So then once we've created that profile, we obviously just need to assign it to a device, and doing that is as simple as finding the IMEI or a series of IMEIs if you're managing them with all the same profile, and we can deploy the same profile to the device as required. That will mean that now the device is tied to Microsoft Intune as a UEM right out of the box. So if that device is ever factory reset, we can obviously ensure that it can't be misused. It gets locked into the enrollment cycle. And so no matter what a user does, especially if we have the advanced features on the profile configured, as we do here, where we have our advanced settings, we can lock compromised devices. So if it is not enrolled, so if the device is powered on, but for some reason is not enrolled, after 7 days in this profile, the device will automatically lock itself down. It'll also automatically lock if the device is found to be rooted or running some sort of an unofficial firmware. The lock message will obviously come up, and this is fully editable, and a phone number can be supplied so that the device can have, so the user of the device, or if it's lost, for instance, it can be found, they can get in touch with the phone number. Then I also mentioned that there was somewhat of a bonus feature as part of enrolling a device via a advanced profile in Knox Mobile Enrollment. And we can also use this feature by selecting the IMEI of the device that you would like to target or manage. And we can see this locked, unlocked element at the top of the device management pop up. And if we do find that the device needs to be locked for any reason, it is as simple as touching this toggle and setting it to locked. Now in this case, it will turn yellow at first before the device is locked. Now I can see in front of me that the device is indeed locked. And so now if I reload the devices page and head back to that device, we can see that it is now turned red because the device is confirmed as locked. From here, we have a couple of management options where we can, if the device has been knocked off the network for any reason, we can deploy a PIN number. So the device currently has a passkey on it, which I can supply here. So we have this PIN where we can continue, and this is obviously used if whoever's found it or whoever has the device has called in. And then we get another PIN number to be able to unlock the device remotely with an offline unlock. There is also the option to be able to just unlock the device as simply tapping on this locked toggle, and the device will automatically unlock, provided it is obviously on the mobile network or on a Wi-Fi network. So whilst I wait for that device to finish unlocking itself, we're going to head into Knox, the platform for enterprise, and the Knox service plugin. And obviously, with all these demonstrations, these are ideally to support you in being able to think about how you might show a customer how they can deploy these sorts of services utilizing Knox Suite and Microsoft Intune. So first things first, for the Knox platform for enterprise, we obviously need to enable it in the UEM. And so we can go through to apps within Intune, tap Android, and then we would need to add an application. From here, we can go to app type and then manage Google Play app before heading to select. From here, the manage Google Play iframe will load, and we can quite easily search for the Knox service plugin. And that should be found after a few moments. From here, we can tap the Knox service plugin, and obviously this has already been approved for use as part of my demonstration setup today, but it would be as simple as selecting setup, pressing select, and then there's an on-screen prompt that asks if you would like to maintain that selection if any of the device permissions were to change. Generally speaking, especially for Knox service plugin and any other client coming from Samsung Knox, we would sort of tick yes to allow that through. So if any of the requirements for the apps change in the future, they were able to continue working. And so once we have the Knox service plugin application ready for use within the console, we're able to look at configuring a Knox service plugin profile. Obviously, once we've finished selecting the application, we can tap sync, we can refresh, and then we should be able to find the Knox service plugin just in the Manage Google Play Store app list. And assigning that is as simple as being able to go into the app's properties, down to the assignments page, and we can edit that as we need to. So we can either configure that as a required app or as an available for enrolled devices, or so on. Obviously, an app like the Knox Service plugin, we would always recommend it's a required application to ensure it's installed on devices and that users can't uninstall it. This is obviously especially important for if you have debugging enabled, and so the client is visible on the device. We wouldn't want that to be removed. Obviously, most use cases would have debugging turned off, and so it's hidden as a service application. So now we'll go back into the devices page, and under Android, we can go to configuration. And in order to be able to create a Knox Service plugin managed profile, we can create a new policy where we can select Android Enterprise and the profile type of OEM config. Tapping create, we can select a name. And if we want, chuck in a description, but most importantly, we need to select the config application, and we'll have a list of associated apps that we can use here. Obviously, the Knox Service plugin is the one to target in this case. From here, we just tap next, and then we are presented with all of the different features of the Knox platform for enterprise that are configurable via the Knox Service plugin. Just for this example, I'm going to come back out of the creation page and into a profile that I created earlier. Where we can see the configuration settings that have been deployed for the device. Now, most importantly, we obviously need to ensure that we enable each of the different tiers of device management as and when they are selected. Now, in order to enable all of the features within Knox Suite for the Knox Service plugin, we need to provide the Knox Suite license key for our devices to be received. And obviously that license key is available in the Knox admin portal, where we can go to licenses and find our Knox Suite key. Obviously in this case, we have a trial, and anyone can get a trial key just by going to actions and get license. And then we can select Knox Suite, generate trial license. Obviously, if you have a commercial key, you would obviously want to use that. Finding the key is as simple as tapping the license name. And once that's loaded, we'll be able to see the license key as well as all of the other key information around that device, around that license. Copying the license key across is obviously a very simple process, and we can add that license key into the Knox Service plugin configuration. So in this case, obviously, as I mentioned before, we have debug enabled. And this just means that the Knox Service plugin client is actually visible on the device. It's really handy for devices that are being tested. So IT can see exactly what's deployed to the device when the new version of a deployment is received, as well as if there are any issues, we can also see exactly what's gone wrong. Usually we get an error message of some sort, which can sometimes be a little bit tricky to decipher, but they've improved massively over time, and we are now in a position to be able to quite easily see what we need to see. Now, heading into our device-wide policies, I'm going to show just how easy it is to be able to launch applications after they're installed by using the Knox Service plugin device-wide policies configuration. So from here, we have our application management policies, where we can configure these. And by scrolling down, we can find the package name for auto launch. And here we can see I've already configured the remote support client and the Knox Asset Intelligence clients to automatically launch. The remote support client needs to be auto launched in order to receive its configuration once it's deployed through Microsoft Intune, and I'll be covering off what that deployment needs to look like very soon. The Knox Asset Intelligence client doesn't need to be listed here. The reason I have listed it here is because if you're deploying the Asset Intelligence client to a device after the device has been enrolled, it will need to be launched for the first time in order to ensure that it does receive its policy. and also without sort of care and attention, we also need to enable the application management controls at the very top level. This also includes at the very top level of the device policy controls. We must set this to true, otherwise any feature below this policy will not be enabled on the device. If any features are enabled under the device management policies, but their sub-feature is not, or even the device-wide policies is not enabled, we'll receive an error to tell us that there is a policy that has been configured but not enabled in the error messaging. And then, as I mentioned before, we also have the remote control policy that we can deploy via the Knox Service plugin. And again, this is a device-wide policy control, especially focusing on the fully managed deployment type today. But we can go to advanced restriction policies. And we can see that's just under the top of the device policy controls. We can configure that. And obviously, again, we enable the advanced restriction controls, set that to true, and then we can find the allow remote control option, and we can set that to true also. And then finally, before I move away from the Knox service plugin, I've not got too much time left, and I'm conscious that I've got quite a few bits and pieces to get through. I'll also very quickly touch on the additional features that Knox Suite enables through the Knox Service plugin, and obviously the Knox platform for enterprise. Most especially, I find one of the more interesting ones is around the device key mapping. So under the device-wide policies, we have device key mapping, which can be found scrolling down, but if you've already configured something, it'll be on the left-hand side. And from here, we're able to enable things like the Xcover key mapping for Microsoft Teams. As I mentioned earlier, Microsoft Teams has a walkie-talkie function, and the Xcover key, which is the red key on the side of our Xcover devices, can be mapped to use that as a push-to-talk walkie-talkie solution. Just by tapping true on this feature and enabling the key mapping feature device-wide is enough to make sure that that works out of the box with any Xcover device. Now, obviously, anyone using different applications has lots of different configuration options that they can support here, including things like key mapping to launch applications. If we just set this feature to true and the enable key mapping to true, we can also go back into our Knox Service plugin. And then there is the device key mapping to launch application configurations. From here, we can select to add a setting. I'll go into the created one here, where we can actually set the device key mapping based on what we want the user to be able to do to launch this application. In this case, I've got the side key double press. So we double tap the home key, which natively launches the camera. But in this case, I've actually set the package name for it to launch Google Maps. And so now the device that we have here in front of me, I'll be able to show on remote support shortly. If we double tap the side key, it now automatically opens Google Maps. And this is a really useful feature if you've got a specific application that users would need to actually launch quite quickly without needing to find the app even on the home screen. Then they're able to launch that very easily on the side. Okay, great. Hopefully that gives you a decent overview of what we can do with the Knox Service plugin. There are obviously hundreds and hundreds of features. We even go into quite decent granular features around password management as well in the device-wide policies. Okay, so heading into Knox ePhoto, as I'd said, we want to be able to manage firmware on devices, and doing this out of the box can obviously be quite tricky without Knox Suite. And from here we have our device campaigns, and we're able to use EMM groups with obviously EMMs to be able to deploy specific campaigns to devices that are members of those groups. First things first that we'd want to do within ePhoto though is to make sure that as soon as a device is registered to ePhoto, it actually receives a campaign. Usually I would set this to lock the device. And obviously it goes without saying that there is a whole host of granular information that we can use to deploy a a campaign to devices and ensure that firmware is updated in the exact way that we need, whether that's being through the schedule, the firmware installation period, or even down to the download period and over what network that we want this to be applied. Once we've gone through this information, we then get to assign the devices and firmware. And in this case, as this is the default base firmware, I've actually set this to just lock the current firmware. So whatever the device comes out of the box with, it will just lock it there. And this is especially important for if there is a more recent Android update. Say, for instance, there'll soon be Android 15. And if there is an in-house application that does not necessarily work properly with Android 15, or if there's any uncertainty as to its compatibility, if there are any issues, then we can ensure that the device is locked to a specific firmware. But first thing that we're going to want to do is lock it to the current firmware to ensure it doesn't automatically update when it's out of the box. Obviously, once a device is enrolled into Knox ePhoto, the consumer route for firmware updates is then blocked, but this campaign just really doubles down on that fact and ensures that you can see within the console itself that the device's firmware is locked. Just being enrolled is enough, but personally I quite like to have a campaign telling me that it has actively locked the firmware. And then we can look into how we can manage the EMM group synchronization for devices. Now here we've already got Intune set up and configured. But obviously we need to know how to be able to deploy that configuration to Knox ePhoto and get the synchronization from Intune with its group memberships into ePhoto. And I'm going to very quickly whiz through the requirements to do that. And so for Intune, we actually need to go into Microsoft Azure for this section. And from here we can use our search resources and we can find app registrations. From here we can see a couple of pre-existing applications that have been found, but in the scenario that you need to generate a new one, you can go to a new registration. We can give that a name, and we can find the account types, which in this case just needs to be accounts in this organization directory only, which is the default position. And then from here we can just tap register. And we can find the application ID and the directory tenant ID. So this is this field here and this field here. Those are the main sort of linkings for the tenant IDs that go into Knox ePhoto. And then we also need to create a client secret. In order to do that, we can go to Clients and Secrets. Which is just under Manage and then, Certificates and Secrets. Then we can create a new client secret. Here we can provide a description and then we can set when to expire. Now for ePhoto, we set this to, I'm sure before it used to have a never option. Sorry, this seems to have been updated since I last saw it. But we can go for 24 months if we choose to, which is obviously a couple of years, or we can go to custom where we can provide a long end date. And we can add that client secret here. And from here you can see the secret ID, and that's actually the code that we need to be able to enroll or to link EMM groups with Knox ePhoto. But before we do this, we need to add the API permissions for this app registration. And from here we have the permissions we require to select, so we can add permissions. And then under Microsoft Graph, we have application permissions. Then under the option to select permissions, we need to enable the device read all. Oop, definitely not that one. Device read all. And so we have device here, device.read.all. We can select that. We then have group read all or group member read all. Where we have group and then group read all. And then finally is device management, managed devices. Why are we failing to read that one? There we go. So we have this read all option here as part of the permissions, and we can add these permissions into this configuration. And then under the configured options, we can also grant admin content for our KSE lab, which is our test tenant in this case. And you can see once we've done that, we can see the status also updates into being a manageable permission, which may take a few seconds. There we go. So we've granted these permissions for this API app registration. Now heading back into ePhoto, enabling the groups. Apologies, 2 seconds. So we can now, for this moment, I'll look at reconnecting the EMM. And so as we saw, our client ID, our client secret, and our tenant ID that we generated a few moments ago can all be added here, and then we can reconnect. So obviously in this case, if I needed to re-establish a connection with the client secret, say for instance it had expired after 2 years, we can do that right here, reconnect, and then we'll be able to manage the devices through these groups. In this case, we've already managed this group, and we can see that I have a group here for Knox Expert EMM Group Sync that I have no devices in currently. So now, as part of an automatic management configuration, I am able to head into groups within Microsoft Intune, go through groups, and we have our Expert EMM Group Sync. And then we can add a direct member of this group. And we find the most recent device that I've had here. I can also select myself as the user if I want all of my devices to be enabled for that. And so refreshing this, we can see that the group management has been updated. And fairly soon after, we should see that that group is automatically updated with the number of devices that are as part of that group within Intune. Now, if that group was dynamic and it was set to retrieve any, say, Android device from Samsung, this group would automatically be populated over time after enrollment. And so we can enable this group to actually have a specific campaign. So I've actually realized that I've automatically deployed this default campaign, which is the EMM Group Sync campaign. But to be able to do this for any other campaign, or if there isn't a campaign already assigned, we can go to Assign Campaign and then just select which campaign that we wish to deploy. That could be to lock the firmware, or it could be here. We can see this EMM Group Sync campaign that I have created, where we're able to actually set the specific Android version to this device out of the box. And that's one of the ways that we can automatically manage the firmware that's on devices relatively automatically out of the box by ensuring that firstly we lock a device's firmware, and then secondly, once the device is in the group membership that it needs to be in, we can also then have that automatically deploy another campaign that results in the device being updated to the firmware that is needed once it's a member of the relevant group in Intune. Okay. And so I'm going to head now into the Knox remote support client. So here we have a list of devices that we have deployed a managed configuration to through Microsoft Intune. Obviously, this is just the one device at the moment that I've got in front of me. And we were able to deploy this configuration through the application page within Intune. If I head to Android to be able to filter down and then find the remote support application, we can see that this is deployed to devices. And we can see that that's including the test devices that I have here. Heading back into apps and then Android if we choose to, we can go to app configuration policies. And from here, we can see that I have a Knox Expert 2024 remote support policy. Now here under the properties, we have a couple of different options that I'd like to deploy. So first we can go through to the settings and add permissions automatically to ensure that the remote support client is able to just continue with its tasks without the user having to engage with the device itself. So out of the box, we can just grant any permissions. And for simplicity, I'll quite often choose with the Knox clients, we can just automatically grant any permissions that we choose to. If obviously for some reason a customer decides that they don't want to do all of them, they can just do the necessary ones. And then we can also add the secret key, which is the configuration where the device is able to automatically start the remote connection without a user interaction. And to do this, we can go into Knox Remote Support. And at the top right-hand side where we have the user sign-in information, we can click the downward arrow and we can see that the secret key is just here under this option. We have two options here where we can renew or we can copy. Obviously, if we renew this key, it will break the link between the existing app configuration. And that's obviously the warning that you receive within the console here. For now, I can cancel that and we can see that we can also copy that key. From here, within this app configuration policy, we can then just select to add a secret key. Actually, I can delete this here and show it's as simple as adding this. And obviously for these apps, there are managed configurations. So a known managed configuration from the managed Google Play Store, where we have the secret key is obviously part of the description of to be able to use the automatic start or force run feature of Knox Remote Support. So here we just tick this box, tap OK, and then we have our configuration value where we just need to paste that value from the console. And then we can obviously save the the app configuration for deployment to devices. And what this means is once the device has been enrolled into Intune and it's received this app configuration policy, the device, because it is fully managed, will actually automatically come up on this screen. There's nothing that the user needs to do, and that's especially because the client secret is already available in the app configuration, and the Knox service plugin has also deployed the automatic launch process, and so the device has already launched the remote support client with the device being enabled here. So now if this device hadn't had that happen, these ask to start and automatically start options would be grayed out or not visible here at all. We would only have the option to start with a code. And that's because on the device, when the user opens the Knox Remote Support client, they are only able to give a 6-digit code to be able to do that. Whereas here we have the automatically start option. And then we have our screen turned off. And really painfully, the device is still locked from earlier on. I've got the feeling it's come off of the Wi-Fi, and so it's locked for an offline enrollment. So I won't worry about that for now. But as discussed, obviously, this does show that the device can automatically be configured for remote support services. And as they're enrolled into Intune and receive all of the policies that we've deployed, they'll be listed here, ready for you to be able to manage them, either with permission of the user when you tap Ask to Start, and it will say, hey, your IT admin wants to access the device, press yes to go or no to no. Or we can automatically start. And this is especially useful for kiosk devices if for some reason the device hasn't been doing what it should be or isn't in much use, or just needs some new configuration adding, but it needs something to be typed in. For instance, we can automatically start that, manage the device, and then disconnect, and the device will be ready for those users with the kiosk. And lastly, for a final app configuration, we also have the Knox Asset Intelligence client listed as a config here. And here we just provide the properties to grant the permissions to the application so that once it's installed, it's able to run without hindrance by the Android system. One thing that's worth noting with Android enterprise apps in Intune is even if the Asset Intelligence client is deployed to the device out of the box, it doesn't get recognized by Microsoft Intune as a system application. And as such, if it is not listed in your apps and deployed to devices, it will end up being removed from the device as an undesirable application. And so it's as simple as just assigning the application to users, and we can obviously make it easier with permission being granted through this app configuration to ensure that the Asset Intelligence client is enabled on the device, fully enrolled, and is able to continue with its job in the background without creating any issues. Now, very, very quickly, I can head into Asset Intelligence where we can see the dashboard. And on the home page or the dashboard itself, we can scroll down and we can see the Knox Service Plugin status. And from here, we can see that I've deployed this Knox Expert 2024 profile to a device. And we can see that that status is currently succeeded. We can see the device that it's been deployed to, and we can also view the schema for that device. And from here, obviously, it's just the plain text schema, but we can see things like the allow remote control policy, which is just here, as well as the auto launch applications and which applications are set. We can see all of the configuration. If for any reason that there had been an error with this report, with this deployment, there would be an error message in the policy report section, and we can view exactly the reasons why the Knox Service plugin profile has not been deployed perfectly. So if there is just one part of this schema, for instance, as I said earlier, this enabled being true option, if this isn't enabled, but there are configurations under it, it will give you an error to say, hey, these haven't been configured, and it's because this is enabled feature is set to false. And then finally, for my session today, sorry, I'm running a few minutes over time. I just wanted to very quickly show how easy it is to support users with obtaining logs. This goes slightly outside of the Intune experience itself, but obviously sometimes things happen on devices that are unexpected, especially with different UEMs. Sometimes devices are doing different things, and most UEMs don't have the features built into them to be able to support users getting devices, let alone remote support or anything else. And so we can head into Knox Asset Intelligence, where we can select the target device that we wish to obtain logs for. And we can request diagnostics device logs. From here, we can select the device log type, which is device debug, or TPC dump log, which is more for network related issues. And we can decide whether we want to request that silently or with permission. Obviously, requesting silently would be that the device automatically generates these log files and then automatically sends the logs to Knox Asset Intelligence. So I can tap confirm here. And from here again, we can go to select the device. We can select actions and then view device log. And we can see that the device logs have been requested and who by and when. And then once they're retrieved, they will appear in the system. Not sure if they're going to retrieve just yet, but we can see on the diagnostics page that we have diagnostics logs and snapshots available, and also the status of those. So for this device that I've just requested logs from, we can see that the status is requested. And once those are here, they'll be under the delivery section. Download will be a link, and we can also view all of the device logs as required by our needs. Okay, sorry for the very quick sort of whistle-stop tour through Knox Asset Intelligence, but I hope that's been helpful to you for sort of picturing exactly how we can elevate UEM in their abilities to manage Samsung Knox devices. So here is a very quick wrap-up. We have a quick recap. So we've been able to deploy a mobile enrollment configuration, which automatically enrolls devices out of the box. We've then got Knox Platform for Enterprise, which is elevating a series of Android Enterprise features within a UEM console, most notably Intune today, but this does apply to pretty much any mainstream UEM. We're then also able to deploy Knox ePhoto, which again elevates the UEM's ability to control firmware on devices. Normally, Android Enterprise will only allow you to manage device firmware for up to, I think it's 90 days, unless it's been changed recently. Whereas ePhoto, we can do that indefinitely and at a far more granular level. We're then able to also automatically configure the Knox Remote Support Client and enable that to be used right out of the box, with or without user permission. And again, that's especially important for kiosk devices which don't have a user, and so there's no one to grant those permissions. We can then just connect to those devices. And then Knox Asset Intelligence, where we're able to monitor the deployment of Knox Service plugin profiles and also obtain device logs with relative ease. And sorry for that very, very quick final few minutes, but that is the session for today. Thank you very much for listening.